The crisp, white tablecloth felt like a surrender flag between them. On one side sat Kevin, his posture perfect, his smile as sharp and cold as the crease in his trousers. On the other was Chloe, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was supposed to be their anniversary dinner at Per Se, a place she'd only dreamed of. But as he slid the small velvet box across the table, not a ring box but something flatter, her dream curdled into a nightmare. He didn't say, "I love you." He said, "I think we need to be realistic." With those 6 words, her world didn't just crumble. It was systematically dismantled right there under the glittering chandeliers of a life she was never meant to have. He thought she was nothing. And for a long time she believed him. But he never imagined that from the ashes of her humiliation a queen would rise, and that one day he'd be the one begging on his knees. The air in Per Se was thick with the scent of money and truffles. It was an atmosphere Chloe Jensen had never grown accustomed to, despite 3 years with Kevin Moss. For him, it was native air. For her, it always felt like she was holding her breath, waiting to be found out as an imposter. Kevin adjusted the cuffs of his Zegna shirt. "Chloe," he began, his voice a carefully modulated baritone he'd practiced for boardrooms. "We've had a good run. A great run, even. A run. Like a race. Like something that inevitably has a finish line." Chloe's hands, which had been clutching her napkin in her lap, went cold. She looked at the box on the table. It wasn't a ring. It was too rectangular. "You've been wonderful," he continued, the word landing with the weight of a consolation prize. "But my career is at a pivotal stage. The partners at Goldman, they're watching. The circles I'm moving in, the people I'm networking with, it's a different league." She stared at him, her mind struggling to connect the dots. "What does that have to do with us?" she asked, her voice, a small, fragile thing in the grand dining room. He sighed, a sound of profound theatrical patience. He opened the box for her. Inside, nestled on black satin, was a delicate but clearly not extravagantly expensive silver bracelet. A severance package. "I need a partner who fits," he said, avoiding her eyes and looking out at the panoramic view of Columbus Circle. "Someone who understands the nuances of that world. Brittany, for instance. You remember Brittany van der Sloot from the charity gala. Her family has a seat on the exchange. She gets it. She doesn't have to try." The implication was a slap in the face. Chloe, with her freelance graphic design career, her sensible apartment in Astoria, and her portfolio full of passion projects for non-profits and local businesses, was trying too hard and failing. She was a project, not a partner. "So, you're breaking up with me," she whispered, the clatter of silverware from a nearby table suddenly deafening. "Here, on our anniversary, I thought it would be more civilized," he said, as if bestowing a kindness. "A beautiful memory to close the chapter." He pushed the bracelet box closer. "Please, take it. A token of my appreciation for your time." Your time? Like she was a contractor whose project had ended. Humiliation, hot and acidic, rose in her throat. She looked from his perfectly coiffed hair to his dismissive smirk and saw him for the first time, a hollow man constructed from brand names and ambition. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the polished floor. Heads turned. "No, thank you, Kevin," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I don't need a participation trophy for having loved you." She turned and walked away past the curious stares of the other diners, through the hushed elegance of the restaurant, and out into the cool night air. She didn't look back. The tears started the moment the doorman hailed her a cab, a silent, scalding river that tracked the path of her broken heart. The weeks that followed were a blur of grey. Kevin, ever efficient, had her belongings boxed up and delivered by courier. He was already publicly dating Brittany. Their photos splashed across the society pages of online magazines, laughing at a polo match in the Hamptons, looking elegant at the New York City Ballet. The captions praised them as the city's new power couple. Chloe, meanwhile, felt powerless. She sublet her small Astoria studio and moved into a tiny fifth-floor walk-up in the East Village. Her freelance work, once a source of pride, now felt trivial. Kevin's words echoed in her mind. She doesn't have to try. Chloe felt like all she ever did was try. She poured her soul into her designs, her unique blend of minimalist aesthetics and bold emotional typography. But to men like Kevin, it was just scribbling. It wasn't a family legacy or a trust fund. It was nothing. Her confidence, already a fragile construct, was shattered. She started taking on cheap, uninspired gigs from content mills, designing logos for $10, formatting ebooks for pennies a page. It was mindless work that paid just enough to cover rent and ramen. She was drowning, and the worst part was she believed she deserved it. Kevin had held up a mirror, and she had accepted his reflection of her as the truth. A girl who was nice enough, but ultimately not enough. A stepping stone now submerged and forgotten as he walked toward his glorious future. She was nothing. 6 months after the breakup, Chloe's world had shrunk to the size of her 15-inch laptop screen. Her apartment was a chaotic mess of empty coffee cups, design books she no longer opened, and a persistent feeling of failure. She was working on another soul-crushing project, designing a new menu for a small, struggling coffee shop in Soho called The Daily Grind. The pay was abysmal, but the owner, a kind old man named Sal, had promised her free coffee for a month, and at this point that felt like a fortune. She sat at a small table in the corner of the cafe, making final adjustments on her laptop. The design was actually something she was proud of, a rare flicker of her old self. She'd used a warm, inviting color palette and created a custom hand-drawn font that felt both modern and timeless. It was far better than what Sal was paying for, but she couldn't bring herself to deliver substandard work. It was the only piece of her identity she had left. The bell above the door chimed and a man walked in who seemed to instantly alter the room's atmosphere. He wasn't loud or flashy, quite the opposite. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark grey suit with no tie, his quiet confidence a stark contrast to the performative arrogance she was used to from Kevin's world. He had a calm, observant intensity, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the menu board behind the counter. He ordered a black Americano, his voice low and steady. While Sal prepared the coffee, the man's gaze drifted around the small shop, eventually landing on the prototype menu Chloe had left on her table. He walked over his movements fluid and unhurried. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was even more resonant up close. "Is this your work?" Chloe looked up, startled. "Oh, yes it is. It's just a draft for Sal." He picked it up, his long fingers handling the cardstock with a surprising delicacy. He didn't just glance at it, he studied it. He ran a thumb over the custom font, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a full minute he said nothing. Chloe's anxiety spiked. Was he going to critique it? Tell her the kerning was off. "The balance is exceptional," he finally said, looking at her directly for the first time. His eyes were a startlingly clear shade of blue, intelligent and piercing. "You've captured a sense of established tradition while still feeling completely fresh. The font choice, it's proprietary." Chloe blinked, stunned. No one had ever analyzed her work with such precision. I drew it myself. I wanted it to feel personal to the cafe." "You have a remarkable eye," he stated, not as a compliment, but as a fact. "Most designers would have just used a stock font, collected their fee, and moved on. This has integrity." He placed the menu back on the table. Sal called out that his coffee was ready. The man nodded to her, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He paid for his drink, and as he was about to leave, he paused and walked back to her table. He pulled a sleek, heavy card from his wallet. It was black with minimalist silver lettering. Nathaniel Caldwell, founder and CEO, Caldwell Ventures. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Even she knew that name. Caldwell Ventures was one of the most powerful and secretive venture capital firms in the world. They didn't invest in companies. They built empires. Nathaniel Caldwell was a legend, a so-called kingmaker in the tech and branding worlds, known for being ruthlessly brilliant and intensely private. He was almost a ghost, rarely photographed, never interviewed. "My firm is always looking for talent with vision," he said, placing the card next to her laptop. "People who don't cut corners. If you're ever interested in working on projects with a bit more scale than a coffee shop menu, my office knows how to find me." And with that, he was gone. Chloe stared at the card. The thick, matte finish felt impossibly luxurious in her hands. It was absurd. It had to be a mistake or a prank. A man like Nathaniel Caldwell, a titan of industry, noticing her work in a dingy coffee shop. It was the stuff of fantasy. For 3 days, the card sat on her desk, a stark black rectangle in her sea of mediocrity. Her mind raced with self-doubt. It was a fluke. He was just being polite. He gives these cards to everyone. If she called, his secretary would laugh at her. Kevin's voice returned, whispering in her ear, "You're out of your league. Don't embarrass yourself." On the 4th day, as she was about to accept another mind-numbing gig creating banner ads for a cat food brand, she looked at the card again. Integrity. He had said her work had integrity. No one, not even Kevin, had ever used that word to describe her or what she did. With a surge of desperation that felt terrifyingly like hope, she picked up her phone. She typed out an email, her fingers shaking so badly she had to start over 3 times. It was short and professional, simply stating her name, where they had met, and attaching a link to her online portfolio, the one she hadn't updated in months, the one filled with the work she did before she started believing she was nothing. She hit send and immediately felt a wave of nausea. She had just made a fool of herself. 24 hours passed with no reply. Then 48. The silence confirmed her fears. It was a fluke. She was an idiot. She closed her laptop, ready to resign herself to a lifetime of cat food ads. Just then her phone buzzed. An email. From Audrey Finch, Finch at Caldwell. Ventures. Subject your portfolio, Ms. Jensen. Mr. Caldwell has reviewed your portfolio. He has a portfolio company, a biotech startup called Viridian Dynamics, that is in desperate need of a full brand overhaul before their Series B funding round. The current branding is, in his words, an unmitigated disaster. He believes you have the requisite integrity for the task. An NDA and a preliminary project brief are attached. If the terms are agreeable, we would like to begin immediately. The initial consulting fee will be waived upon receipt of the signed NDA. Chloe opened the PDF attachment for the contract. She scrolled down to the consulting fee. Her eyes widened, and she had to read the number 3 times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. The fee for this one project was more than she had earned in the entire last year. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a dream. This was real. And for the first time in a long, long time, Chloe Jensen felt the faint, unfamiliar flutter of hope. The Viridian Dynamics project was a baptism by fire. The startup was brilliant on a technical level. They were developing groundbreaking gene editing technology, but their branding was, as Nathaniel had allegedly put it, an unmitigated disaster. The logo looked like something from a 90s clip art gallery. Their website was a confusing mess of scientific jargon, and their mission statement was non-existent. They were geniuses who couldn't explain what they did to anyone who didn't have a PhD in molecular biology. Chloe threw herself into the work with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. She lived and breathed Viridian Dynamics. She spent the first week doing nothing but research, interviewing the scientists, the engineers, the lab techs. She didn't just want to understand their product. She wanted to understand their passion, the why behind their work. She rented a small, dedicated office space with the advance from Caldwell Ventures, needing a clean slate away from the oppressive chaos of her apartment. The space was stark white with one large window overlooking a busy Manhattan street. It was her sanctuary and her war room. She covered the walls in mood boards, color palettes, and typographic studies. Her point of contact was the formidable Audrey Finch, Nathaniel Caldwell's executive assistant, who was more like a chief of staff. Ms. Finch was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp grey eyes and a demeanor that could curdle milk. She was precise, demanding, and utterly allergic to bullshit. Their first video call was terrifying. Mr. Caldwell does not abide failure, Ms. Jensen, Mr. Finch said, her voice devoid of warmth. He is trusting you with a significant asset in his portfolio. Do not make him regret it. But as the weeks went on, Chloe realized Ms. Finch's harshness was a whetstone. She demanded excellence, and in doing so, she forced Chloe to produce the best work of her life. Chloe sent over her initial concepts, a complete rebranding strategy. She proposed a new name, Helixora. It was sleek, modern, and evocative of their work. She designed a logo that was an elegant, abstract representation of a DNA strand, both scientific and artistic. She developed a tagline, Engineering Tomorrow's Cures. She expected a barrage of critiques. Instead, she got a one-line email from Ms. Finch. Mr. Caldwell is intrigued. Proceed to phase 2. For Chloe, that was the highest praise she could imagine. The project consumed her. She worked 18-hour days fueled by coffee and a burning desire to prove herself. She wasn't just designing a brand, she was telling a story. She crafted a narrative that transformed Helixor from a complex science project into a beacon of hope for humanity. The final presentation was to be delivered to Nathaniel Caldwell himself along with the Helixor board. Chloe flew to San Francisco, the trip and luxury hotel all arranged by Ms. Finch's office. She spent the entire night before pacing her hotel room, rehearsing her pitch until her voice was hoarse. This was it, the culmination of a month of sleepless nights. She walked into the Caldwell Ventures boardroom, a stunning space of glass and steel overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Nathaniel Caldwell stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light. He turned as she entered, and his piercing blue eyes met hers. "Ms. Jensen," he said with a nod. "Welcome." He looked different than he had in the coffee shop, more formidable. He radiated an aura of immense power, yet his gaze was calm and focused entirely on her. The board members, a collection of serious-looking men and women, took their seats. Chloe felt a tremor of her old insecurity, the fear that she, the girl from Astoria, didn't belong here. Then she looked at her presentation loaded on the screen. She looked at the Helixor logo, a symbol she had created from nothing. And the fear subsided, replaced by a cold, clear confidence. She knew this brand better than anyone. She owned it. She began to speak. Her voice was steady as she walked them through her entire strategy, from the core philosophy to the color of the buttons on their future app. She didn't just present designs, she presented a vision. She showed them how this new brand would connect with investors, doctors, and eventually the patients whose lives they would save. When she finished, the room was silent. One of the board members, a skeptical looking man named Dr. Alpert, cleared his throat. "It's very slick, Miss Jensen," he said, the word dripping with condescension. "But we are a serious scientific institution, not a lifestyle brand." Before Chloe could respond, Nathaniel spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "You are a failing institution, Robert. Your technology is revolutionary, but your inability to communicate its value has you on the brink of obscurity. You're hemorrhaging money because you can't inspire confidence. What Ms. Jensen has done is not slick, it's translation. She has translated your genius into a language the world can understand. It's the single most valuable asset you'll have in your Series B round." He turned his gaze to Chloe. "It's brilliant," he said simply. "We're implementing the entire strategy effective immediately. Audrey will handle the new contracts." The board was stunned into submission. After the meeting, as Chloe was packing her laptop, Nathaniel approached her. "I knew you had integrity," he said. "I didn't realize you were a visionary." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she stammered, overwhelmed. "Nathaniel," he corrected her gently. "I have another project I'd like to discuss with you. Several, in fact. It seems a number of my companies could use a dose of your vision." He paused, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "It would require you to start your own firm. I'd be happy to be your first client. And your seed investor." Chloe's mind reeled. Her own firm. Funded by Nathaniel Caldwell. It was an impossible dream taking shape right in front of her. I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say yes," he said, "and have dinner with me tonight. We can discuss the terms." That dinner was the beginning of everything. It wasn't a business meeting. They talked for hours, not about contracts and valuations, but about art, about books, about their childhoods. He was surprisingly open, telling her about his upbringing as a math prodigy who always felt more comfortable with algorithms than with people. He listened to her, truly listened, as she spoke about her passion for design, the way a perfect curve or a specific shade of blue could make her feel. He saw the parts of her that Kevin had dismissed as trivial and treated them as treasures. Over the next few months, their relationship blossomed alongside her new company. With his backing, she launched Jensen Creative. He was true to his word, sending a flood of high-profile projects her way from his portfolio. Her reputation grew at an exponential rate. She was no longer a freelance designer, taking gigs from content mills. She was the visionary branding strategist behind some of the tech world's most exciting new companies. She moved into a beautiful loft in Tribeca that served as both her home and her studio, a space she designed herself. She was successful, respected, and for the first time, truly happy. The ghost of Kevin Moss and his crushing verdict had finally begun to fade. One crisp autumn evening, Chloe found herself on Nathaniel's arm at the annual fundraising gala for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. A year ago, she would have been reading about this event on a gossip blog while eating takeout. Tonight, she was wearing a breathtaking midnight blue gown by Oscar de la Renta, a personal gift from Nathaniel. She felt a world away from the insecure girl who had been dumped in a fancy restaurant. Being with Nathaniel wasn't about the glamour or the money, though those were undeniable perks. It was about the way he looked at her as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. He valued her intellect, challenged her ideas, and celebrated her successes as if they were his own. He hadn't made her his queen. He had simply provided the resources for her to build her own damn castle. As they were speaking with a curator near a towering Jeff Koons sculpture, a familiar, unwelcome voice cut through the air. "Chloe, Chloe Jensen." "My God, is that you, Chloe?" Froze. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. That voice, a blend of feigned surprise and smug superiority, was seared into her memory. She slowly turned, her expression carefully neutral. There he was, Kevin Moss, looking exactly the same in his tailored tuxedo, his face a mask of disbelief, and clinging to his arm was Brittany van der Sloot, dripping in diamonds and disdain. "Kevin," Chloe said, her voice cool and even. "What a surprise." Kevin's eyes raked over her from her elegant chignon to the designer gown that probably cost more than his car. He took in the confident set of her shoulders, the easy way she held her champagne flute. This was not the broken, weeping girl he had dismissed. He was visibly baffled. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You look well, very well. Freelancing must be paying better than I thought." The jab was subtle, but it was there. Before Chloe could reply, Nathaniel turned, placing a gentle hand on the small of her back. He extended his other hand to Kevin. "Nathaniel Caldwell, he said, his voice calm but resonant with authority, and Kevin's jaw practically hit the floor. He stared at Nathaniel, then back at Chloe, then at Nathaniel's hand on Chloe's back. The gears in his brain were grinding, trying to process an impossible reality. He shook Nathaniel's hand belatedly, his grip weak. Kevin Moss. I work at Goldman Sachs, he stammered. Chloe and I, we used to know each other. Ah, Nathaniel said, his expression unreadable. He looked at Chloe with a warmth that was clearly reserved just for her. Chloe is one of the most brilliant strategic minds I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Her firm, Jensen Creative, has single-handedly tripled the valuation of 2 of my portfolio companies this year alone. Kevin's face went pale. Jensen Creative. Her own firm? He had assumed she was here as someone's guest, a +1, not a power player in her own right. Brittany, sensing a shift in the social calculus, gave Chloe a saccharine smile. Jensen Creative. How lovely. It's always so nice when women have a little hobby to keep them busy. Chloe met her condescending gaze with a serene smile of her own. It's more than a hobby, Brittany. It's an empire. But I appreciate your support. She then turned her full attention back to Nathaniel, dismissing them completely. Darling, you were telling me about the new acquisition in the aerospace sector. The message was clear. Her conversation with Nathaniel Caldwell was important. Her conversation with them was not. Kevin and Brittany were left standing there flabbergasted. Kevin watched as Chloe and Nathaniel walked away laughing together, weaving effortlessly through a crowd of society's most elite. He had thrown her away, convinced she was a nobody, a liability to his ascent. Now here she was, arm in arm with a man who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over, a man who spoke of her with a reverence Kevin had never imagined. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. The encounter left Chloe slightly shaken, but not in the way she would have expected. It wasn't a resurgence of pain or heartbreak. It was the jarring feeling of looking at a ghost. Kevin was a relic from a past life, a life where she was small and apologetic. Seeing him now only highlighted how far she had come. Later that night, as they rode home in the quiet comfort of Nathaniel's chauffeured Maybach, he took her hand. Are you all right? He asked. I'm fine, she said, and she meant it. It was just strange, seeing someone who used to have so much power over my happiness and realizing they have none at all now. The only person who has power over your happiness is you, he said, lifting her hand to his lips. I'm just honored to be in its orbit. But Chloe knew the world wasn't that simple. People like Kevin and Brittany didn't just fade away. They saw her success not as an inspiration, but as an affront. And as they drove through the glittering streets of Manhattan, she couldn't shake the feeling that this ghost from her past was about to come back to haunt her. The encounter at the gala lit a fire under Kevin. It wasn't love or regret that fueled him, but a toxic cocktail of wounded pride and raw jealousy. In his world, people stayed in the boxes you put them in. Chloe was supposed to be in the nice girl but not good enough box, forever looking up at him. Instead, she had somehow leapfrogged him into the stratosphere. It was an intolerable offense to his ego. He began to obsessively track her success. He saw the articles in Forbes and Fast Company about Jensen Creative hailing Chloe as a branding prodigy. He saw her name on lists of 30 under 30 innovators. Every mention of her success was a fresh wound. Brittany was even more venomous. I don't get it. She'd complain over brunch at Balthazar. She's not that special. Caldwell must be funding her as a pet project. It's frankly pathetic how she's sleeping her way to the top. This seed of an idea that Chloe's success was not earned but given to her in exchange for her affection became their gospel. It was the only way they could reconcile her rise with their dismissal of her. They started whispering this narrative into the ever-receptive ear of New York's high society gossip mill. The first hint of trouble came in the form of a blind item on a notorious gossip site, Page 6, hinting that a reclusive tech titan was propping up his latest artistic muse's vanity business, blurring the lines between the boardroom and the bedroom. Chloe saw it and felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. It was vague, but she knew it was about her. Nathaniel, ever pragmatic, dismissed it. Chloe, people have been trying to smear me for decades. It's the price of success. Pay it no mind. Your work speaks for itself. But the whispers grew louder. At a product launch for one of her clients, a rival CEO made a snide remark to her, just loud enough for others to hear. Must be nice to have an investor who's so personally invested in your success. The poison was spreading. Brittany, using her social connections, made sure the rumors reached potential clients. A promising meeting with a luxury hotel chain was abruptly cancelled without explanation. Another potential client, a fashion label, chose a less qualified firm after their board expressed concerns about the optics of working with Jensen Creative. The attacks were insidious, impossible to fight head-on. They weren't questioning the quality of her work, which was undeniable. They were attacking her integrity, framing her as a kept woman whose success was unearned. It was a classic, misogynistic strategy, and it was starting to work. Chloe was frustrated and hurt. She had worked tirelessly to build her company, pouring every ounce of her creativity and intellect into it. To have it all dismissed as the whim of a rich boyfriend was infuriating. One evening, she was working late in her studio, wrestling with the gnawing anxiety, when Nathaniel arrived unannounced. He found her staring at a blank screen, her face etched with worry. "They're trying to ruin me," she said, her voice tight. "They're trying to turn my greatest achievement into a scandal." He came and stood behind her chair, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "What you have built is real, Chloe. It's made of talent and steel. Their whispers are just air. We can't fight air, so we change the weather." "What does that even mean?" she asked, exasperated. "It means we create something so undeniable, so powerful, that it silences all the noise," he said. "I have a new project, my biggest one yet. The Caldwell Foundation is launching a global initiative to fund clean water technology in developing nations. It's a multi-billion-dollar endeavor, my life's work, my legacy, and I want Jensen Creative to be the exclusive branding partner." Chloe was speechless. This wasn't just another tech startup. This was a project that could change the world. It was also a massive risk for him. Tying his personal legacy project so publicly to her firm would either silence the critics for good or hand them the ammunition to destroy them both. "Why?" she whispered. "Giving this to me now, it will only fuel the rumors." He knelt beside her chair, turning her to face him. His blue eyes were intense, unwavering. "Because you are the best person for the job, period. Your ability to distill complex ideas into powerful human stories is exactly what this initiative needs. I will not allow the petty jealousies of small people to stop me from working with the most brilliant mind I know. I believe in your work, Chloe, and I believe in you. Let them talk. We have work to do." His faith in her was a shield. It extinguished her fear and ignited a fire of determination. She would not let Kevin and Brittany win. She would create a brand for this foundation so powerful and so pure that it would be untouchable. But Kevin had no intention of letting go. His obsession had taken a darker turn. He wasn't just gossiping anymore. He was digging. He used his corporate research tools and contacts to pry into the financials of Chloe's clients, looking for any weakness, any hint of impropriety. And in the complex web of venture capital and startups, he believed he had found something. A thread. A tiny, insignificant discrepancy in the early paperwork of the Helix Saw rebranding. It was nothing, a minor clerical error, but in the hands of a skilled manipulator, a thread could be woven into a noose. He was no longer just a ghost from her past. He was a hunter, and he was closing in. Kevin felt a thrill of triumphant malice. The thread he'd found was a small inconsistency in the initial funding transfer from a Caldwell Ventures subsidiary to Jensen Creative for the Helix Saw project. It was a simple routing error corrected within 24 hours by the accounting departments. But on paper, presented without context, it could be spun to look like a shell game, a way for Caldwell to funnel money to Chloe's new company off the books before it was officially incorporated. It was thin, but combined with the pervasive rumors, it was enough. His own position at Goldman Sachs had become precarious. He'd made a series of risky trades that hadn't paid off, and his superiors were watching him closely. He needed a big win, something to restore his golden boy status. His team had been working for months to secure a massive round of financing for a mid-stage tech logistics company, Axiom Freight. The deal was potentially worth hundreds of millions. The final hurdle was a presentation to the most sought-after investor on the street, Nathaniel Caldwell. Kevin saw his opening. It was perfect. He would not only secure his career, but also humiliate Chloe and expose her as a fraud in front of her benefactor. His plan was twofold. First, his team would deliver the pitch for Axiom Freight. Then, at the end, he would pivot to a due diligence concern, presenting his evidence about the Helix Saw transaction, framing it as a risk and questioning the judgment of Caldwell's team and, by extension, Chloe. He would be the hero saving the great Nathaniel Caldwell from a gold-digging opportunist. The day of the presentation arrived. Kevin walked into the Caldwell Ventures boardroom feeling like a conquering general. The room was just as Chloe had described it, an intimidating panorama of power. Nathaniel Caldwell sat at the head of the long table, flanked by his senior partners, including the hawk-eyed Audrey Finch. "Mr. Moss, welcome," Nathaniel said, his tone flat and businesslike. "We have a full schedule. Please begin." Kevin and his team launched into their polished presentation. The data was solid, the projections were optimistic. Kevin was in his element, confidently explaining market caps and logistical synergies. He felt the momentum building. He was winning. And that Kevin concluded with a flourish, is why Axiom Freight represents the premier investment opportunity in the logistics sector today. Nathaniel listened impassively, his fingers steepled. A competent presentation. However, we've identified some significant inefficiencies in your proposed supply chain model. Before we go any further, I'd like to bring in our external consultant who has been reviewing your data. She has a few suggestions. He nodded toward the door. It swung open and Chloe Jensen walked in. She was dressed in a razor-sharp dark grey power suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She held a tablet in her hand and moved with an aura of absolute command. She took a seat next to Nathaniel directly opposite Kevin. Kevin's blood ran cold. The air was sucked from his lungs. It was like a nightmare. He stared at her, his mouth agape. Chloe didn't even glance at him. Her focus was entirely on the presentation screen. "Mr. Caldwell, gentlemen," she began, her voice crisp and authoritative. While Axiom's core concept is viable, their logistical framework is archaic. They're relying on a centralized distribution model that creates significant bottlenecks. My team at Jensen Creative has run a counter-analysis. With a flick of her finger, the screen behind Kevin changed. It was now filled with her own charts, her own data models. They were cleaner, smarter, more advanced than anything his team had produced. By implementing a decentralized AI-driven network of micro-hubs, she continued, we can increase delivery efficiency by 40% and cut overhead by almost 30%. It's a more agile, scalable, and ultimately more profitable model. Axiom's current strategy isn't just inefficient, it's a liability. She systematically and dispassionately dismantled his entire pitch. She used their own data to expose their flaws, her logic irrefutable. She wasn't just a graphic designer, she was a brilliant strategist who had done more insightful work in a few days than his team had in months. The Caldwell Ventures partners were nodding, visibly impressed. Audrey Finch actually smiled. Kevin was humiliated, his entire professional credibility shredded in under 5 minutes by the woman he had called nothing. Rage and desperation clawed at his throat. He saw his career, his one chance, slipping away. He fell back on his pathetic plan. This is all very interesting, he sputtered, trying to regain control. But speaking of liabilities, Mr. Caldwell, during our own due diligence, we uncovered something concerning. A matter of financial integrity. He threw a file onto the table. This concerns the initial funding of Jensen Creative during the Helixor rebranding. We've found irregularities that suggest a potential conflict of interest. Funds being moved in a way that lacks transparency. He looked directly at Nathaniel, expecting shock concern. Instead, Nathaniel's expression turned to ice. Nathaniel didn't look at the file. He looked at Audrey Finch. Audrey, was this the clerical error from the sub-ledger you corrected on October 14th of last year? The very same, Nathaniel, she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. The one that took my intern 7 minutes to identify and resolve. Nathaniel turned his glacial gaze back to Kevin. Mr. Moss, you come into my boardroom with a flawed proposal. My consultant, a woman whose firm I hired for her unparalleled strategic insight, corrects your work in a way that saves the potential deal. And in response, you choose to attack her character with a flimsy and desperate accusation based on a resolved, minute clerical error. He stood up, his full height seeming to dominate the room. You are not the kind of man I do business with. You are not smart enough to innovate, and you are not honorable enough to admit when you are outmatched. Instead, you try to tear down the person who is. The presentation is over. Your proposal is rejected. He looked at Kevin with utter contempt. And I would advise you to find a new line of work. I'll be making a call to your managing director at Goldman Sachs this afternoon to discuss the unprofessional nature of your due diligence. I imagine they will be very interested. It was an execution. Kevin sat there paralyzed as Chloe packed up her tablet, gave a polite nod to the board, and walked out without ever making eye contact with him. She didn't need to. Her victory was absolute. The last thing Kevin saw as he stumbled out of the boardroom in a daze was Nathaniel Caldwell placing a proud protective hand on Chloe's shoulder as they walked down the hall, together, their quiet conversation echoing in the suddenly silent, cavernous space where his career had just died. The shockwave from Kevin Moss's career implosion radiated through Wall Street with the speed of a stock market crash. The story became a cautionary tale whispered over expensive lunches and after-work drinks, the arrogant banker who tried to play a king and got checkmated by a queen. As Nathaniel had promised, his call to the managing director at Goldman Sachs was brief and fatal. Kevin wasn't just fired, he was erased. His security pass was deactivated before he even made it back to his desk. Stripped of his title, his expense account, and the corporate armor that had defined him, he was suddenly terrifyingly exposed. His new reality was a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Fort Lee, New Jersey, with a view of a brick wall and the lingering smell of his neighbor's cooking. The Zegnia suits hung in his closet like relics of a dead civilization. One rainy Tuesday night, he was mindlessly flipping through channels, a cheap beer in his hand, when a familiar face flashed onto the screen of a business news program. It was Chloe. She was being interviewed on a segment about the new faces of philanthropy. She looked breathtaking, not just because of her elegant, simple dress, but because of the light that seemed to radiate from within her. She spoke with effortless intelligence and passion about the Caldwell Foundation's Project Clearwater, explaining complex logistical challenges with a clarity that made them seem solvable. Ms. Jensen, the interviewer said, "You've done more than brand a foundation. You've created a global movement. What's the secret?" Chloe smiled, a genuine, warm expression that Kevin now realized he had rarely seen. "There's no secret," she replied. "It's about telling the truth. The technology is the hero of the story. The people doing the work are the heroes. My job was simply to build a stage big enough for the whole world to see them." The camera cut to footage of a new water purification plant in a village in sub-Saharan Africa. A banner with the elegant, hopeful logo she had designed fluttered in the breeze. Kevin watched as children drank clean water, their faces breaking into smiles. He felt a hollowness in his chest so vast it was almost a physical pain. He had looked at this woman and seen a liability, an accessory that didn't match his ambitions. He had failed to see the universe of talent and integrity right in front of him. He hadn't just lost a girlfriend, he had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of value itself. He picked up the remote and switched off the TV, but he couldn't switch off her image, radiant and powerful, a queen in a world he could no longer access. Meanwhile, Chloe's world was expanding. Jensen Creative now occupied 2 floors of a Tribeca high-rise, a space filled with light glass and the vibrant hum of creative energy. Her team, a carefully curated group of the brightest minds in the industry, revered her. She wasn't just a boss. She was a mentor who pushed them to do their best work while fiercely protecting their creative integrity. Her success was undeniable. The Project Clearwater launch had been a global phenomenon, silencing the whispers about her relationship with Nathaniel and cementing her reputation as a visionary. The very people who had once snubbed her, fueled by Brittany's gossip, now flooded her office with requests, hoping a little of her magic would rub off on them. She politely declined most of them, choosing instead to work with clients who aligned with her values, those focused on sustainability, education, and innovation. One evening, months after Kevin's spectacular downfall, she was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the city lights begin to sparkle against the twilight sky. The space was her sanctuary, her creation, from the custom-designed furniture to the art on the walls. It was her castle, built not of stone and mortar, but of talent, resilience, and an unwavering belief in her own worth. The glass doors slid open, and Nathaniel walked in. He was holding a single perfect white orchid. He rarely came to her office, always respectful of it being her domain, her kingdom. His presence filled the room with a quiet, comforting strength. "I just came from a UN briefing on Project Clearwater," he said, his voice filled with a deep, resonant pride. "They're fast-tracking our field operations in 3 countries because of the public response. The ambassador from Ethiopia specifically mentioned your media campaign. He said you didn't just ask for donations, you gave his people their dignity back. He said you did that." A warm glow spread through her chest. It was a team effort. A story that powerful just needed to be told. "All stories need a storyteller," he countered, stepping closer. He looked around her office at the awards gleaming on the shelves, at the bustling energy of her staff visible through the glass walls. "It feels like a lifetime ago, but do you remember that first day in the coffee shop?" She laughed softly. "I remember being terrified you were going to tell me my font was derivative." "I saw a spark," he said, his expression turning serious, his blue eyes searching hers. "A flash of brilliance where no one else was bothering to look. I've spent my life hunting for value, for potential, in algorithms, in companies, in markets, but the single greatest discovery I ever made was you, Chloe." He reached into his briefcase, but he didn't pull out a file. He pulled out a sleek black frame. Inside it was the original menu she had designed for Sal's coffee shop. He held it out to her. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is a masterpiece. Not because it hangs in a museum, but because you poured your soul into it for its own sake, for an old man who could only pay you in coffee. It has integrity. This isn't just paper and ink. It's proof that your character is constant, whether the reward is a free cappuccino or a $1 billion valuation. It's the first thing I saw in you, and it's the thing I admire most." Chloe felt tears welling in her eyes as she took the frame. In that moment, she vividly recalled the cold, judgmental atmosphere of Per Se. the sting of Kevin's words dismissing her passions as worthless. He had offered her a silver bracelet, a token to close a chapter. Nathaniel was offering her a testament to her very soul. He then gently took the frame from her, set it on her desk, and got down on one knee. There in the heart of the empire she had built, he took her hand. His was warm and steady. "The world sees the queen on the throne now," he said, his voice low and earnest. "They see the awards and the magazine covers, but I was lucky enough to see the architect drawing the blueprints when no one was watching. I don't want to make you my queen, Chloe Jensen. You are already a queen. You built your own kingdom, forged your own crown. I'm asking if you would let me be your king, to stand by your side, to be your partner in everything, to build with you for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" The tears now flowed freely down her cheeks. They weren't the scalding tears of humiliation she had shed leaving that restaurant so long ago. They were tears of profound joy of being seen and loved, not in spite of her strength and ambition, but because of it. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid a stunning, elegant ring onto her finger. It wasn't a gaudy diamond meant to show off his wealth, but a sapphire, the color of his eyes, set in a unique modern design that looked like something she might have sketched herself. It was perfect. He stood and pulled her into his arms, and they stood together by the window, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city. Her past had not defined her. A man's cruel dismissal had not been her epitaph. It had been the prologue. Kevin had thought she was nothing a stepping stone he could leave behind in the mud. He was wrong. She was never a stepping stone. She was a launching pad, and from the ashes of the world he tried to burn down, she had built a legacy written across the sky. Chloe's journey shows us that our worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. She was shattered by a man who saw her as an accessory, only to be found by a man who saw her as an equal, a partner, a force of nature in her own right. But her story isn't just about finding love, it's about finding herself. It's a testament to the incredible power of resilience, talent, and believing in your own vision, even when no one else does. She went from designing $10 logos in a tiny apartment to building a global brand that changed the world. Her ex thought she was nothing, but the billionaire didn't make her his queen. He simply recognized the one that was there all along. If her story of transformation and triumph moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear that their potential is limitless, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of overcoming adversity and building your own empire. What was your favorite twist in Chloe's story? Let us know in the comments below.
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself, already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, what, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper, in her ear. "Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone." He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous, empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty, and in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. No one will ever want you. It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there. Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron. First, Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge. I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible. Too bad, Chloe countered. Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him. Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. You will die alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Okay, I'll go. Chloe's smile was triumphant. That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. Stop hiding behind the ficus, Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. You look like a goddess. Own it. They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. I need some air, she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas? The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. Yes, Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, it's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture. The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. Most people just see the ballerina, he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. You see the work. A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field. Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting. It is my field. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. Good. An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne. Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. You know him, he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. It's fine. I should go back inside. Wait, he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. My name is Alistair. He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. Emma, she replied. Emma, he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work. He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina. Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. "Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now." With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she, gold digger alert? Poor Julian. He's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. "Don't read that garbage," she ordered. "I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient weaponized press release." Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. "Oh, honey." She enveloped Emma in a hug. "Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe," Emma croaked. "Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing." "Of course he did," Chloe said, her voice steely. "This is his playbook. Control the narrative, isolate the target, publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator." Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. "Don't answer it," she whispered. "It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support," Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. "Who is it?" A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. "It's Alistair Sterling." "For Emma Vance." Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. "Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn." "Let him in," Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. "For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in." In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. "Miss Vance." "Emma," he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. "I know this is an intrusion. May I come in?" She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours," Alistair countered. "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. "I also saw his statement." Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen." Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. "Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming." Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. "You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms." He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. "He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence. A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. He built his entire empire on my work. The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. What do you mean, his book? Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the Architect of You directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. He didn't just steal my words, she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity. Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. He won't get away with it, Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. Now, we need to choose our moment. The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. "Recently," he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. "Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process." Julian preened. "It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul." "Interesting," Sarah said, looking down at her notes. "Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, 'To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality.' A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, 'The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality.'" A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. "In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on?" The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name?" Sarah countered, her voice sharp. "Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance?" We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. I am not a victim or a gold digger, the statement read. I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of the architect of you were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out. The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of you was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. How do you feel? He asked, his voice low. Quiet. She whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. The storm. I think it's finally over. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. No, he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn. The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorne fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne. It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you." He didn't understand the irony of his own curse. Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. He thought it was an ending, she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work. Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential. If this story of resilience, justice, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the most incredible real-life dramas. What did you think of Julian's takedown? Let me know in the comments below.